The big discussion in British politics for the foreseeable future is, of course, how to tackle the debt crisis and deliver quality public services when spending is tight. So wrote the Shadow Chancellor in a recent newspaper article. George Osborne also warned that he's seen what happens when political parties refuse to face the facts of the modern world. It condemns them to irrelevancy for a generation. I'm going to be talking about all of that in a moment. But, Mr. Osborne, let's just start by talking about how you plan to reform the financial regulation of this country, the banks and all of that, because you've got a paper coming out tomorrow. First of all, the FSA, the Financial Services Authority, it's been at the centre of a lot of discussion recently. What's going to happen to that if you win power?
Well, we're going to abolish the Financial Services Authority. We're going to put the Bank of England in charge of regulating our banks, our building societies, other significant financial institutions, because we think the system that Gordon Brown created patently failed, and we can see that with the credit crunch and the collapse of many British banks that then had to be rescued. And we want a strong regulator like the Bank of England, where people know who's in charge, it's got the reputation and the clout to stand up to the bankers, and at the same time create a consumer protection agency that does more of the consumer-facing regulation, which also has the clout to ensure that the consumers are treated fairly.
It could be said that all sorts of institutions called this crisis wrong and didn't see what was coming, and the Bank of England was one of them. So why give them more power?
Well, all sorts of institutions didn't call the crisis correctly. You're right, but given everything that's happened, it would be bizarre to stick with the system of regulating the banks that failed so spectacularly. Now, of course, the Bank of England made mistakes, just like the FSA did, and the government made mistakes. But in the end, when you look at the different institutions and you say who has the clout, the reputation, the expertise, the history to stand up to the banking system and regulate it properly, in my view, in my judgment, it is the Bank of England. And it would be strange, after everything that we've been through, not to change the way we regulate banks. I mean,
you look at the people, not just institutions, of course. And do you look at somebody like Mervyn King and the people around him and think, actually, this is one of the wisest people around, and I want to give this man more power?
Well, it's not about individuals, because, of course, you know, in 2013 there'll be a new governor of the Bank of England. It is about understanding you cannot separate central banking from the regulation of money and the regulation of banking. And that was the fundamental mistake that Gordon Brown made in 1997 when he came out of being Shadow Chancellor, became the Chancellor without any consultation, took away from the Bank of England its role to call time on debt, actually against the objections of the late Eddie George, who was then the governor. So we are taking a different approach, which is in opposition, spelling out our plans in great detail tomorrow. People, I think, will be surprised by the detail and the amount of work we've done on this, because we want to create a system of sound banking and move this country from an age of crisis to an era of confidence in its banking institutions.
So, if I'm banking with a big bank, let's not name names, and I'm worried as an ordinary depositor and borrower, that this bank is engaged in what used to be called casino capitalism, doing all sorts of strange things with credit swaps and all the rest of it around the... Are you going to deal with that problem? Are you going to reassure me?
Yes. First of all, if this retail bank, a bank that's got branches in a high street, taking your deposits or anyone else's, is engaging in very risky activities, very risky investment banking activities, like large-scale proprietary trading or internal hedge funds, then it will have to set aside very large amounts of money as an insurance policy to protect the taxpayer. Now, I happen to think that there are certain activities, like large-scale proprietary trading, which cannot really easily sit with taking retail deposits on a high street. So you wouldn't divide the banks into two kinds? But I think that is best done internationally. I think we just did it in Britain. This is a very international industry. We would see the industry either leave this country or people get round the rules. So you've got to do these things internationally. But it's clear to me that if you want to do the highly risky activity, by the way, lots of investment banking is not highly risky, but the highly risky investment banking activity, like the large-scale proprietary trading, then you have to set aside an insurance policy, because we've got to deal with this problem, Andrew, of the free option, the fact the fact that banks can make money in the good years, and then when they fail, the taxpayer has to bail.
I understand that.
And not to address that seems to me absolutely criminally negligent for the political classes, given everything that's happened.
Let's let's turn to the taxpayers and indeed everybody else and some of the really grim news that seems to be heading our way, inevitably, because of the amount of money that's been borrowed. Now, we had John Major on this programme, and he was saying it's going to be something like the equivalent of 5p extra on income tax for everybody, 20p rate of VAT, and there's still going to have to be the spending cuts as well to get things in kilter. And if we don't do those kind of big, drastic things, the country's international credit may simply collapse.
Well, first of all, myself, David Cameron, have come on this programme and warned consistently for months that there is a debt crisis, that Britain has a serious borrowing problem.
So what can you do about it?
Well, let me just say, first of all, we have been the people who have highlighted this. We're also the people who've said the cupboard is bare, that the country does not have limitless funds in the future. We opposed the temporary VAT cut because we thought the country couldn't afford it. Wasn't popular in the short term, but I think was the right long-term judgment. And now we are the people saying honestly to the country that public spending needs to be cut. And it's Gordon Brown who is in this ridiculous position of dishonestly claiming that somehow there's a choice we can go on spending more money. But I think it's important because it has established our credentials as people who are telling the public the truth about the very difficult decisions that are going to be required to deal with an absolutely alarming budget deficit.
Well, let's move on from talking about telling the public the truth to telling the public the truth.